My name is Maria Santangelo. I'm the Associate Curator in European Decorative Arts and Sculpture here at the Fine Arts Museums. And it is my pleasure to start our second part of the session on the French Period Room in the American Museum. And to lead us off, we have Ulrich Leben here, who's coming as a research scholar at the Bard Graduate Center in Decorative Arts, Design History, Material Culture in New York. Leben is currently visiting professor and special exhibition curator at the Bard Graduate Center. In 2013, he curated an exhibition on the Georges Henschel collection, a collaborative project with the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Since 1996, he has been working as associate curator for the Rothschild collection at Waddesdon Manor, Buckinghamshire, England. After serving as an apprentice to a cabinet maker in Germany, he studied art history at the École du Louvre, France, in Paris, and received his PhD at the Rheinisches Friedrich Wilhelm Universität in Bonn. He is also a consultant on the refurbishment of historic rooms in the Palais Bonnet, residence of the German ambassador in Paris, a project on which he is currently preparing a publication. Leben has published on the history of French and German interiors and furniture design in numerous periodicals and exhibition catalogs. It is my great pleasure to introduce Ulrich Leben for us.
Thank you very much, Martin and Colin, for having me to talk here. It's a topic which I'm very interested in, and preparing this lecture, I was really fascinated by the fact that all this material which comes from the continent, we have to go a long way to come to the West Coast, which is a big kind of trip for somebody who comes from middle of Europe, to see how can we instigate new life into this feature of our museums, which I think has been done in an exemplary way in this museum here in the Legion with this ongoing project. And I hope that it will refuse some life back into our period rooms in Europe, which is a great achievement what was done here by all of you. So I will take you through a kind of whisk walk through European wall paneling, the use of wall paneling, and what I actually found very interesting. You often encounter when you work about French material and you're abroad, and I'm mostly working abroad in England or in America, that people say, well, this stuff has been taken out of French houses and it's now abroad and it's no longer in France. And actually you think that, of course, we have what I show you here, paneling, which is still in situ in ecclesiastical buildings in France, still in big numbers, and of course also in wonderful chateaux and national museums, like on the right screen, the Chateau de Fontainebleau, or the wonderful Singerie and the chinoiserie scenes in the Hotel de Rohan. But we also may not forget that that paneling from very early on was taken out and of the original buildings. And I show an example from Germany, which I was very delighted to discover, that actually in the little estate of Wörlitz, the Gothic house was adorned by Count Franz in the 1770s with Renaissance paneling, which has been stripped out of his city palace, which he had changed into the neoclassical feature and fashion. And he wanted to just get rid of it, but still keep it because he had this ancestral relation with the material. So these rooms are today installed, or these fragments are installed in the Gothic house. Another interesting example, again from Germany, is Robert de Cotte paneling, which was made for the Turner and Taxis family for a palace which was erected in Frankfurt. The Turner and Taxis family had the postal, the mailing monopole in the empire, and they ordered none less than Robert de Cotte to establish a city palace. The palace has been dismantled and handed over to the city before the war. The paneling was salvaged, luckily, because afterwards the palace, the original fabric, was bombed out, but the paneling has survived miraculously in St. Emmeron's Castle in Regensburg, well away from the big welfare of World War II. So what is very amusing in this palace, when you go there, that you see that St. Emmeron's Palace, the rooms are much lower than they should have been normally. And so you walk on the kind of hip level with this panel which is on your ankles. It's very funny what they did with it. They salvaged it, they keep very well track of it, and it's wonderfully a study project, but it's set up in a kind of ransom way. So this is from very early on in the 19th century. When we go on, in the 19th century, we see that newcomers in the field of art collections, such as the Rothschild family, and I show here pictures of the house I'm working with, the family and the National Trust. They very cleverly bought with their architect, and in the case of Waterston, it's Ferdinand de Rothschild with Detailleur, they bought sets of panelings, pairs and series, and because already rooms such as the one you have upstairs, they became very rare and they were already very expensive. But then Detailleur and Ferdinand very intelligently laid them out in a way to form a very harmonious ensemble that if you walk through the galleries at Waterston Manor today, you would just think like, wow, what wonderful job did they do. And it would deserve somebody of the curators to understand how these things were kind of very intelligently fitted in order to pretend this harmonious ensemble, implicating all kind of theatrical techniques like faking wood graining and using stucco and other things in order to create this wonderful ensemble. On the whole, these assessments were done very carefully, and I just show details of an overdoor set, an 18th century overdoor from another context set in the Grey Drawing Room, and the incredible careful insertion of period panels, or on the lower screen only period carving into a 19th century panel. And what gives it away here is the kind of coloring. Let it just be like this in the frame of a lecture like this to understand how already at that period in the 1870s, 80s, that period carving was cherished by collectors as something very rare. The overall impression would lead to creation of period rooms such as the Grey Drawing Room at Waterston, which originally comes, or the basic paneling comes from a house we have already heard about this afternoon, because it was made for the Hotel Biron, which is today known as the Musée Rodin. But what is very amusing again is that Ferdinand de Rothschild and his architect just play with the paneling and find a very wonderful layout by replacing the doorways, inserting into the places for the doors these wonderful portraits, full-length portraits by Reynolds of British beauties, which Ferdinand collected massively and very much wanted to have around himself in his house. Now, the difference of Waterston with other Rothschild houses is that Ferdinand used original panels and sets of panels, in opposition to his cousin Alfred de Rothschild, who at Halton House, of which I show you an image of the Great Hall, had the whole decoration made in plaster and cardboard and then painted. So there was nothing really authentic or from the period. Of course, we look at these houses today and love them, and they are very, very interesting, but this is a relatively new thing. When I was studying, my peers would say, this is all fake, this is make-believe, this has no value at all. And it's only today that you see, of course, Waterston is fantastic because we have the stone carving, 19th century, but real stone carving. We have the set paneling, set in the 19th century, but 18th century paneling. But we also appreciate actually what the decorators and inventors did in the late 19th and early 20th century, simply because so much of it has been destroyed by our peers who didn't like that style. And the war and all the other things did the rest. A little circumstances which really makes me very happy that I'm here today is that in the very early stage of the project, Martin spoke to me and I said, well, you know, we have some panels from the Hotel Lumière, and I did this montage here with the panel, which is one of our most wonderful set of Regents panels in the West Gallery of Waterston Manor, to just show you there's a set, and I have to go back to Pons to really isolate everything, but there is a real relation between the Legion and the holdings you have here and the paneling, which is upstairs. And the only period room which was built in Waterston as a real period room is the Green Boudoir, which comes from a hotel on the Rue de Richelieu and which was bought as an ensemble by Ferdinand de Rothschild. And this room, as it is today, doesn't represent anything of what we have upstairs. It has been refigured with a very dark green color in the 19th century. The gilding has been overpainted. But what is very interesting, that Ferdinand de Rothschild in 1885 considered this paneling so important that he actually adjusted the size of a room to be built to the amount of paneling he had available, which he bought in Paris. And this is a new thing. This is really something which is a new way of looking at these rooms as historical witnesses of something, of a bygone period. Now, the idea of the period room starts to be taken over to America in big style at the end of the 19th century. And this is what I'm going to focus on really in my talk. And when we go to the East Coast, we can visit some of the most wonderful places where this really all started, with the houses in Newport, Rhode Island. And I just show you Alva Banderwit's wonderful Trianon-inspired house, which is very accordingly called Marble House, with a wonderful repetition of the ballroom, which looks really at Louis XIV period, and also the dining room with marble-lined walls and incredible ornament. And just to make it full here, the furnishing, everything is being preserved, it's there, but the extent of luxury went as far as to produce dining room chairs in cast bronze. They are so heavy that you can hardly move them, but that wasn't important. It was just like this ostentatious copying of French style and the grand goût, and they set many people over in Europe in labor and many enterprises to make these wonderful things and have them really shipped to the new mansions which were built at that time. Another very interesting case in Newport is Ochre Court, which is Salva Regina, which was built for another patron of the time, Ochgen Gollet, in 1892. And this figures a ballroom in so-called Louis XIV style, which for somebody who has studied history of art at the end of the 20th century and goes there today is very amusing to see, because it has lots and little to do with Louis XIV style. It's very overblown, it's out of proportion, and what is very interesting is that most of the panels have actually been cast in plaster and very carefully painted to look like wood and gilded. But that was the time and that was the period, and there was nothing wrong with it. We have the same case already 15 years earlier on the royal level with the castles of Ludwig II in Bavaria, who actually very carefully had missions sent to Paris to measure the Galerie des Glaces and the other official apartments in the Château de Versailles, and then reconstruct what I show you on the screen, which is standing on a very little lake in Chiemsee in Bavaria, and is really a replica, a 19th century replica of Versailles Palace. So the lure of the Louis styles and of Versailles had existed since many generations. What really came up at the end of the 19th century, and from massively with the publication of a book of which I show you the title page here, the Henry Arver Dictionary de l'Ameublement, and a fact which we talked a lot about with Daniela preparing the exhibition which we had last year with the Metropolitan Museum at BGC, was that the serious study of period and style as we still understand it today in France and also internationally with the different periods following the reigns of the king, this was all for the first time published and really analyzed by art historians at that very moment of the last 20 years of the 19th century. So that when that dictionary by Arver was once on the market, it is now known that clients as Alva Vanderbilt could refer to it and say, please, I want the bed from page X in Arver. And she cabled that over to Paris, and there was a reference after which you could actually construct a bed according to the wishes of the client. So it's very interesting that research, publication of furniture, and the models was a basic condition to kind of appreciate style and to kind of stop to just create ransom creations for wealthy patrons who wanted to go into French style. Another very interesting example around the corner, so to say, on the Pacific coast, is that we know that the Huntingtons, Arabella Huntington, referred to the engraving of the Petit Trianon in the same book of Arver in creation of some of the rooms at the Huntington Art Gallery and Library in San Marino. And it's just kind of confirming this idea that research became really important. From the maker's side, it is very interesting to see that the reference of style would also be the copying or taking inspiration from originals. And it is interesting in this context that when you read comments of exhibitions which were organized, artistic exhibitions which were organized in the framework of the big international world exhibitions in London or in Paris, that authors in the field of decorative arts often complained about the non-accessibility of original models. So the fact that you have in this museum an original Carlin commode, this incredible gilded room here on the Pacific coast, is absolutely sensational. You have to imagine that, you know, I mean, 150 years ago, there was no thinking of having these things out here. And it's very interesting. A craftsman who today would like to copy a piece like this has first-hand access to wonderful period material. Craftsmen in Paris had, if they were lucky, a relative who was working for the furniture administration or who had some access to material. This was not the rule. And we could find this with George Henschel, who did period rooms and who did create houses like Bois-Baudran, a private house for the Comte et la Comtesse de Greffule in the outskirts of Paris, or also international commissions with the agency of Davis and Daniela, help me? Muse and Davis, thank you very much, in London. And he would create these interiors by using his model collection, which is today, by a miracle, ended in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And we see in the evolution of his work and in the process how he gets on with his creations, which were more and more important, we see a very strong difference between an interior such as Bath House in London, which is 1898, destroyed in World War II, so there is nothing left of it, but it's a kind of inspirational Louis XV decoration, and the interior which he did in 1907, 1906 for the fashion designer Jacques Doucet in Paris, that there is a real evolution of using period models in a much more serious, let's just say scientific way than it would have been done 20 years before, or with Détailleur for Ferdinand de Rothschild at Waddesdon Manor. Another wonderful example for an archaeological recreation of a pastiche is the commission which was ordered from him in April of 1904 for a visit of the British King in month of May of 1904, and so within 1 month he changed the state dining room from a kind of high Victorian oak-paneled vestry room into this shiny powder blue dining room, which shows many, many elements which we know from his original element collections in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. This room was done in plaster cast and realized in a very sensational speed, and we know that the workshop could provide one or the other of the techniques, the traditional technique or the plaster cast, because he would continue to work in this house, and he did a very small dining room with a very sophisticated carved paneling, which took over a year to be realized because it was just so difficult and so long to make. Now, for the transition or for the transfer of ideas and the whole idea of style to America, it is very important that we think about the idea of mass travel and also travel in style. And I just show an image from the ocean liner La France, 1912, which was visited by George Henschel in 1912. He was charged by La Comtesse de Greffule to have a showcase designed in which they would show French creations of French decorative arts like pottery or Sèvres porcelain, which would promote French style. But what I found very interesting within the archives is that there were also this little album of the interior of La France, which apparently was praised for its style and its elegance. And I think everybody of us who takes a flight over, which of course is very quick and very fast, but don't we all regret the wonderful vestibules of Louis XIV style or a kind directoire boudoir to take a rest? That would be much nicer. And even for the sports people, they had a gymnasium, which I find most amazing. And it just shows you the difference, how everything has changed since those days. Now, when the American traveler would come to Europe, and they had traveled in style. Of course, they had the railway system, which allowed them to go very quick from Italy back to France, to Germany, and they visited all these countries, and they shopped everywhere, and they found lots of things, and they were very knowledgeable, and also what concerns languages and what they wanted to see there. So they grasped a lot of things. For these visitors, also, Europeans were more and more inclined to provide the service. And the hotel becomes a place where, just before World War I, the style and the comfort would really set new standards also for Europeans. They needed these hotels. Apparently, the Ritz was constructed in 1906, 1907 in Paris, and finished in 1910, was a newcomer. There were no hotels with so many bathrooms before, so that was something very, very new. And it had immediate influence also on private residents. And when we see Julius Werner's residence in Luton, Hertfordshire, which paradoxically has become a 5-star hotel today, but it was built for him and for his wife as a weekend leisure house in Hertfordshire, one can just understand how these two worlds have kind of encountered and influenced each other in the discovery of the French style and the grandeur in order to reflect a certain aisance and art de vivre. Now, Paris itself at that time changed dramatically. The picture on the left-hand screen is a picture which was on the art market some years ago and just shows up to the 3rd floor level where people advertise what they sell in their little shops and in these little winding roads, which were so complained about by many visitors and which kind of Haussmann made really kind of an end of it. And when we look at the wonderful picture of Jean Béraud of the boutique of Jacques Doucet in Vort in Rue de la Paix in Paris, one can only understand why people went to Paris and wanted to enjoy this incredible modern cityscape and the wonderful layout, the new layout of the time. It is also very interesting that Americans came massively, but they didn't only come to visit, some of them remained and they married into European aristocracy, as the very well-known example of Consuelo and Sonny Marlborough, which was not a very happy wedding, but she brought a lot of money and could ensure the Marlborough style of living. And herself, she was very, very fancy of France and had a lot of French furnishings installed in Blenheim Palace. Another interesting coincidence of this is the house of Biltmore in North Carolina. This was built for George Washington II, of the family of Vanderbilt in the years 1889 and 1895, and it is known that he had visited Waddesdon Manor, had visited the Rothschild estate, had taken notes, and after that built something similar, just like 3 times bigger. Preparing this lecture, I realized that Biltmore is the biggest privately owned house in the United States, which is pretty interesting, and it's still standing and very well kept, which is wonderful. Now, in Paris, these visitors would have the choice of incredible galleries and art displays, and I just show a picture of the earlier display of the showroom of Maison Lace and George Henschel, which was in a kind of loft-like industrial structure in the middle of town, just behind the Madeleine, and where you see this multitude of objects which were just piled up there like in a real storage. But there are incredible artworks on this picture, and many of them we were able to re-identify in the collections at the Metropolitan of Art, a Museum of Art. What is also interesting is to know that period furniture and French 18th century style was something which really even made its way into the department store. And I found these wonderful images of the collection of Cognac Jay, of which a big part is today in the city-owned museum Cognac Jay, but that was displayed for the pleasure of the visitor of the department store in special shows which were arranged seasonally in this kind of boutique show with the draped walls and then the pictures on the upper level and the furniture in front. Very interesting way of accommodating artworks and showing clients, familiarized clients, which was meant by Cognac as an education of his clients. The more sophisticated presentation of period furniture is actually depicted in a showroom of the Maison à Lavoine, which I was able to discover only recently in a very small publication and which I was not aware about. Maison à Lavoine was very important at that time, and it's interesting for us in the context of George Henschel because one of the first men of that workshop, Ratteau, worked for Maison à Lavoine. And instead of piling up things as what I just showed you in the George Henschel workshop, in the years around World War I, you see that the decorators go into a much more staged setting of a style room, which would allow your client to show this is what we can do, this is Louis XVI style, this is Directory style, and this is Louis XV, with an assemblage of objects which were assembled sometimes with paneling or with architectonic backdrops, which would allow to situate yourself already much better in the style and familiarize you with the different elements. And again, the more scientific approach to that material is illustrated very well with the documents we found on the Maison which George Henschel made for Jacques Doucet in Paris in the years 1907, 1908. The house doesn't exist anymore, but there is a series of wonderful watercolors and an article published in a periodical of the time, and where you really see that the preparation of how the artwork was staged in the period rooms, if you want, the newly created period rooms, was realized to a degree which is comparable and was compared at the time with the work of a museum's curator. And that was the collaboration between the decorator and the collector, Jacques Doucet, who was well known for the very high level of his collection. The seriousness of the installation comes through when you see that only surviving model we found from the Henschel workshop at an enterprise still in operation in Paris. We are able to associate that model with Henschel and his activity because there is in the cupola you see of this room, we took off the dome to make the photograph, there is a painting which was listed in his estate after his death. So we are pretty sure and really sure that this belonged to him. But it shows again the very serious approach, which is not very different to what the enterprises did here in order to achieve what we see upstairs in a very serious way of setting up a historic paneling and a room with a historic ceiling, really in the way it would have been in the 18th century. Now, performed, these jobs were by a big number of craftsmen, and I just show you the presumed photograph of the presumed workshop of George Henschel. We counted about 80 persons carving and wood on that picture. It is not sure if this is Henschel workshop, but this gives you a dimension or an idea of the dimension of the volume and the amount of work which was realized by these enterprises in this time, which were not little craftsmen doing little work in their little corner. This was big business, and it was an international business, okay? And they produced for a world market already then. So I show you a picture of the residence of Erasmus in Buenos Aires, which was designed by the architect Sargent, and then the interiors had to be prepared in a record speed time. The whole lot had to be shipped from Europe to South America, and it's Henschel who did the dining room. And we think that the commission was shared between different enterprises. We know that Janssen worked there and Henschel and other names pop up, but we think that due to the pressure of time, they really asked a number of enterprises to speed up the whole process. But I think this example of Buenos Aires gives a very good clue about how these commissions had to be realized with a real big effort. And this was not just toying around or having fun with one room or a small project. An even more exotic object or a project was the construction of Akasaka Palace in Tokyo, which was built at the turn of the century, and that was for the Crown Prince of Japan, the Togo Goshu, and we know that Henschel realized certain interiors in this palace. So what I can show you for the moment are images which we downloaded from the internet, and we found even in these, not very precise images, we were able to rediscover copies of panels, of which the originals are in the care of Daniela Kislow-Grossheit at the Metropolitan Museum. So the French prototype was taken from Paris to Tokyo right away, which is pretty amazing. And we don't know yet if this was plaster cast or if this was done in wood, and I hope I can pursue this research in the future to find out more. Now, the Henschel collection in its own right was very interesting because Henschel decided to slow down. He lost his wife very tragically at a very young age. He was then pretty depressed and wanted to have more fun in life. So he wanted to work less and take care of his small children. So one of the first steps he did is that through the intermittence of London art dealer Wertheimer, he got in Durlacher, he got in contact with J.P. Morgan. And he interested him in his medieval collection, and he sold him wholesale the 18th century woodwork collection he would draw from models for his interiors, as well as the medieval collection. Both collections were the foundation stone of the Decorative Arts Department at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So it's just to set a little bit the step where what we are dealing with here. This was really serious work. Now, what is fascinating with the Henschel collection is that it was published in a very highly illustrated catalog, of which I show you 2 pages here on the screen. And the 2 things which came out, of which I just want to fix for us here in this context, is that there was no period room, really, just the so-called, what we call today the Morgan alcove, which is the picture on the right-hand screen, of 3 walls fitted with paneling. These elements of paneling and carving had been massively used by Henschel in different of his projects, which he did, and we could retrace them. And also what you might see on the left-hand picture, and I don't go into the provenance of that material, which is all at the museum in New York, but you see the state of these burned panels. And they are actually really carbonized, and they were said at the time to come from the Tuileries, which of course was a very prestigious royal provenance. We found out that they actually come again from the Rue de Lille, Hôtel de Belle-Île. Thanks to Christian Bollès, we were able to identify them with a photograph which he had published in a publication on the Rue de Lille. But what is fascinating for us is really the state of decay, which apparently had no matter for Henschel. He used these very precious survivals of the 18th century panels such as they were. And this is very interesting. They are in storage, they are in the museum collections, but today there's a different politic, and these objects are very difficult to be shown in a world where people want to see everything perfect and as a masterwork. Now, the Henschel collection arrived in New York, and the decorative arts and the wood paneling of the 18th century was outrightly given to the museum, and it had a strong impact in America, because we know that the house, which was bought by Trumbauer for Anna Dodge Dillman in Washington, D.C., it is expressively said that the library in this house was influenced by a set of library doors which came from the Henschel collection, which I show you in an old photograph on the right-hand screen. The building is today the embassy of Belgium, and it's still up, and you can see these rooms, these woodwork inspired by the Henschel collection on photographs on the internet. Now, the person who really is important at the time was J.P. Morgan, and he was looked for by many people in Europe as a potential client, and he really bought wholesale enormous quantity of art. And what is interesting is that the collection, which I showed you in the Cité de Retiro, in this loft-like space, was just before the sale installed in a very interesting way, made by one of the first men of Henschel in a place which he had bought and established on purpose for the display of his collection. So here, all the artwork gets presented as an isolated work in its own right, and he creates this wonderful ensemble of fragments. Again, we could speak long time about all these elements. Take it per se that this was not a perfect period room. It was only thought as being inspirational for industrials and designers, first in the workshop of Henschel and his own productions in France and Europe, and then in New York when it was bought wholesale by JP Morgan to be installed in the Metropolitan Museum as inspiration for American designers. And there was also, of course, in the age of nationalism, the idea of supremacy, of superiority of style, and French style at that time was really considered as being the ultimate and the very best. What is interesting in that context is that you have to know that you could buy very good copies and replica furniture on different levels in at decorators like Jensen, and this is a photograph from the early 20s of a showroom, and in department stores as Bon Marché, or also Le Grand Magasin du Louvre, in which Henschel even had shares. So these are just photographs we found in preparation of the exhibition. To give you an idea, this is the kind of furniture which the average person of today buys on the flea market in Paris, and which our great-grandparents were able to buy in the Grand Magasin at the time. Now, when this idea comes to New York, it is very interesting to see that one of the first installations, not of a period room, but of incredible period material, is, of course, the Cycle of Love by Fragonard, which was installed in 1915 by White, Allen and Company in the Frick collection, what is today the Frick collection, the Frick Mansion on Fifth Avenue. And it is very interesting that for that project also Henschel was considered as being a possible candidate to set these panels in an appropriate paneling, which didn't exist at the time. The commission did not realize for Henschel, who died in the fall of 1915, and so White Allen did this installation in a very successful way, as we can still today. Other examples of using period fragments or paneling in interiors are known from as far away as Vizcaya, Florida, where the businessman James Deering, under the direction of Paul Chauffin, installed elements or fragments like this trumeau we see with the watch in one of his rooms in Vizcaya. The story continues in the 10s and in the 1920s with installation of the Huntington Art Collection, which was done by Mr. Huntington and his wife Arabella. They used French style really as the backdrop to set their incredible collections of tapestry and furniture, which you can still see today in San Marino in the Huntington Library and Art Gallery. And we have period rooms from the time which survived in museums, and this is also something very interesting which I just want to note, is that several of these rooms which you see today in big American museums actually adorned earlier on private apartments, often in New York City, and were given later to museums of art, such as the Louis XVI room in the Philadelphia Museums of Art by bequest of Eleanor Elkin Rice in 1939 only, and they display a drawing room in a Louis XVI style, using elements but not being a period room as we see it upstairs. This is more that the period elements become a backdrop for the furniture installation, just as Martin has told us earlier this morning. There are other elements which are just set in a kind of way which makes you wonder, and I think it's interesting to see, and I don't want to insist how the fate of the Gilded Room really has changed between the display in the Vanderbilt, in the Duveen gallery in New York on the upper screen, and then the ongoing work here. What is interesting for me to kind of end my presentation is the fact that San Francisco has always been interested in these kind of rooms, and there's a number of rooms which were shown. Some of them have been deacquisitioned, some have been moving from the East Coast to the West Coast and then back to the East Coast. And so I think this whole issue of the period room is really like a floating one, and I really hope very much that the room upstairs will be safe for at least 3 generations now, and that curators who come after us will enjoy that room as much, and that we're doing the work in a way that people can engage even after us. It's interesting to see that some room, like the room from the Hotel Gaulin in Dijon, is again on the art market. You can get this room, which was in several museums in the 20th century. It's again on the market, and it's been wonderfully conserved and is available. I have no interest in the gallery, you know, it's just like other rooms made really amazing ways. So we know that Henschel made rooms for the Grefful couple in Bois-Baudran and in their mansion in Paris. And we were able, via the internet, to find one of those rooms in the Hotel de la Colombe d'Or in Houston, Texas, which I found fascinating. So from the Madeleine workshop of Maison Leis and Henschel into a hotel in Texas. Other paneling, such as this one in the Ringling Museum, is also very interesting. Obviously, it's French paneling from the 19th century, probably plaster, possibly delivered by Allard, and today shown. It was bought by Ringling for his museum in Sarasota, Florida, and it adorns one of the rooms there in a very noble way. Of course, it has nothing to do with the period room as we understand it now, after the museum has this wonderful work of research and of restoration under the direction of Martin. But it's very interesting to see that these rooms can survive, and they survive in different ways. There is no limit for a scale of a room, and Americans like big things, so why not getting a whole theater? So we have the Azzolo Theater, which is an Italian theater from the Veneto, dated about 1798, which was installed in Sarasota, and it's a working theater, which is fascinating because they have lots of performances there, and it's really a very nice place to go. So again, an interesting fact of how this collection, how these things can survive. Private amateurs, of course, they also like them. And one of the most wonderful examples of a private art historians and curators house you can see in Connecticut, Hartford, Connecticut, in the private mansion or private residence of Chick Austin, the famous curator from the beginning of the 20th century, where he combines in a dining room a Baroque Rococo Bavarian alcove with 2 doors, and upstairs he had a Bauhaus interior, and he had all the light features especially coming from Dessau before it was closed by the Nazis, which I find fascinating to see. I think it's one of the earliest places to see pure Bauhaus in this country at an early date. The story continues today with places such as the gallery of Guillaume Fayot, where you see a kind of caverne d'Ali Baba of panels, which is also a resource collection because it's one of those very few enterprises which is 2 generations old, and you find objects and archives, and it's a fascinating place to go. But you also have contemporary galleries, such as the working gallery of Benjamin Steinitz, who is here today with his wife, and who made an incredible installation at Marlborough Gallery some years ago in New York City by combining period paneling, which was set up in the most incredible spaces, with contemporary art and antique furniture. So that is, for me, the idea, what is going on with this? How do we engage the public and the audience with this material? So you can have it at your own home, you can play with it, you can combine it with contemporary art, you can take photos, and Vogue apparently loves to take photos in these rooms. The upper photo left was taken in none other place than the Palais de Rouen in Paris, which is part of the National Archives. The right photograph with the lady reclining on a chair is our dining room in the State Dining Room in Waddesdon Manor. And the lower photograph was taken in the Ritz Hotel. A very interesting installation inspired by a boudoir, which is today in the Metropolitan Museum, and it was a boudoir which comes from the Hotel Crillon, was done by an artist, Karen Zigudat, I have a problem with this, in 2010 in the Metropolitan Museum, and it's very interesting to see in how far contemporary artists can engage with these rooms, and I think this is a very wonderful example to see how a museum can also engage contemporary creators to do something with this material, so that they're not just the stale rooms which we knew for years and can actually make people think and engage to do something with them. There are sometimes examples where the panels become artworks in their own right, just as a panel. When you have, like at the MFA Boston, these incredible, sadly isolated panels by Ledoux, which are standing on their own, and one has to just think, how could one explain them? But there are wonderful examples in their own kind. There is this example of the fantastic shop front in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is used in a very nice way as a display case, which makes sense. And then you have incredible experiences for a European who goes to Los Angeles and sees this, what we call this in Britain, the white elephant on the hill, with the futuristic pavilions, and then you go inside and you feel yourself like in Paris, which is very magic, especially in the incredible light and surrounding of the vistas, which provides the hill on which the new Jean-Paul Getty Museum is located. The most similar comparable example of a room which was installed in a very carefully way very recently is for me the a room from the Hotel d'Orsay, which the Comte d'Orsay had refigured for his newly wedded life in 1770. The hotel is today a ministry on the upper screen, and this room was taken down. It was designed by Chalgrin and very carefully restored about 5 to 10 years ago, which is wonderful to go there. It's a most fantastic room. Serves in the Corcoran Gallery as a multi-purpose room. They were able to furnish it very lavishly. And I think this is kind of the way the room can be used for all kinds of things. In the museum, it's a very big room, but it's also been taken care of as an architectural feature and an artwork in its own right. And I hope I've given you some examples of how the rooms could have a function, can be used. The Morgan alcove probably being the first 3 period walls arriving in this country and being used by the museum still as a very good example of their period today. And I didn't want to finish without showing a picture of this town, which I'm fascinated about, that you go so far and you have this incredible attraction in San Francisco with French art. And I still want to find out more about why that is happening here. And I think there is something which I still have to understand and to learn, because it's pretty amazing that so far away from France and from Paris, we found such incredible examples of Beaux-Arts architecture, such as the City Hall and also the Museum of the Legion of Honor. And I hope we can talk about this more and all together find out more answers to these exciting questions. And thank you very much for your attention from this incredible town. Thank you.